Welcome to DLSN, a podcast brought to you by McGuireWoods. DLSN promotes the advancement of women in private equity and finance through conversations with women in the private equity and finance space. These conversations provide both insights and practical takeaways to inform your deal work and enhance the culture of your organization. If you're ready to drive the industry toward a more inclusive and diverse environment, then it's time to come to the table.
Greetings, this is Penny Zacharias from McGuireWoods, here today with our Deal Us In, a Women in Private Equity and Finance podcast. I'm very excited about our special guests. We have Amy Weisman and Julia Weisman here to join us, a fabulous mother-daughter duo. So I am going to start just with introductions. Amy, I'll start with you. If you could please tell us a little bit about yourself.
It's so great to be here today. Thank you for hosting this podcast. And I'm so pleased to be here with my daughter, Julia. I'm Amy Weisman, and currently I'm a managing director at Sterling Investment Partners. We're a middle market private equity fund investing out of our fourth fund, which is approximately $1 billion, focused on distribution and business services. It's been a bit of a journey to get here, and I've had a great career, which I've very much enjoyed, filled with pivots and creating new roles and opportunities. I started as an investment banking analyst in the 80s in the training program, the classic training program. I then pivoted to become an equity research analyst at another investment bank, which was shut down by the SEC in the early 90s. Well, I pivoted to a new role at an investor relations agency, which was different for someone coming from the investment community because no one really had come from the investment community before. But I combined my investment experience along with teaching newly public companies how to market themselves to Wall Street investors. After that, I had two children. First, I had my son, who I fell madly in love with, and I stopped working because it was very hard to commute from where I lived, which is Westport, Connecticut. And in those days, technology really wasn't what it is today, or at all, actually. Then I had Julia, and I really wanted to get back into the workforce. Someone I met in town was starting a private equity fund, which was a new asset class that hadn't really existed before, and I jumped in. I learned a lot about private equity and the fact that a lot of funds were being raised throughout the 90s. And I realized that a lot of funds were not really differentiating themselves. So I took my investor relations skills and what I learned about private equity and decided to think about what a marketing business development role would be in the private equity space. I was introduced to Sterling Investment Partners, and they had me jump right in again. They said, we would really like you to stay here and start looking for investments for us to make into our funds. And they really had the foresight to back me on that. And they were based in Westport, and they gave me flexibility, which was very unusual at the time. So I was really appreciative of that. Having been with Sterling for over 20 years, I looked up after my children went off to college, and I said, oh my goodness, there's really still not a lot of diversity in private equity. And I took it upon myself to start a platform for women in the private equity space. And it's been very successful. Again, Sterling is enabling me to pivot once more to take what I've done in business development and all the incredible inroads I've made into improving diversity in private equity. And we're going to build a platform around empowering women in our space for Sterling and the industry. We are going to focus on increasing board positions for women in private equity funds, improving the pipeline of recruiting women for investment talent, business development, of course, working with our LPs, our diverse LPs, and also working with our portfolio companies on diversity initiatives. So that's been my career, and it's been one great ride filled with pivots and finding new opportunities when they should be needed.
Thank you, Amy. It sounds like you've been an innovator throughout your entire career and still going. That's really fascinating. So Julia, we'll turn to you to introduce yourself.
Sure. Well, also, I'll echo thank you for having us today. I will say that my tell you about yourself isn't as long as my mom's. I'll keep it short and sweet. I started diving into the business side of things at Syracuse University, where I was in the Whitman School of Management, where I majored in marketing and management. It was a great experience. While I was at Syracuse, I also was president of my sorority, Sigma Delta Tau, for 2 years. So that was also a great experience in managing people. I also was able to be a member of the student government for the business school as well. And since school at Syracuse, I've been at Bloomberg for the last 5 years. I was an intern in 2018 and then continued on my journey in 2019. I started in analytics, specializing in equity and fixed income. And now I currently work with international investment banks. Prior to this, for the last 3 years, I was working with the largest hedge funds in New York. So it's been a great experience so far, and I'm loving Bloomberg.
Thank you. Sounds like you're off to a great start. This is a question for both of you. Just really wonder if you could elaborate on what attracted you to private equity and finance. And Julia, maybe you could start, just having grown up with a mother who worked in private equity. Did you have any concerns before heading down this career path?
So first memories, I remember my mom traveling a lot, or at least it felt that way. I know from all the recordings of my violin concerts and dance recitals that she was pretty much there for most of it.
Thanks.
I always, for the most part, a lot of my friends went into different areas, right? Marketing, PR, things like that. But I've always seen my mom kind of be at the forefront of being a woman in finance. So that did inspire me. I always thought, what do other people do whose moms don't know all this stuff and work in this space? How do they know what to wear to work? How do they know how to fix their resumes? I get emails from my mom in the middle of the night with updates. So I don't think everyone gets that.
Right, exactly. Fix your LinkedIn. What's going on there?
Exactly. But looking back, I know it was probably hard to juggle. I also have a brother in a lot of sports as well. So I'm sure it was a lot, but overall, I think I turned out okay.
Well, I'm glad I was able to be a good role model. And finance is a fantastic career. I always tell women that if you are going to do marketing, communication, or PR, do it in finance. It's the most exciting career to be in. Very interesting business situations, and you get to get in the insides of companies. My career started at the University of Michigan, where a professor said to me, you should do investment banking. And when I was at the University of Michigan Business School, in those years, really the only firms that went to recruit were accounting firms and car companies. So I had to take it upon myself to really march through Wall Street with my resume in hand. And Michigan really wasn't a target school either. It was really just the Ivies to get into investment banking. And I guess I kept a book because apparently it's been passed on from generation to generation of letters, hundreds of letters that I sent to heads of recruiting at investment banks to try to get my foot in the door. I actually remember being at Goldman Sachs and somehow I got into the analyst recruiting event and they said, why are you here? You weren't invited. I said, well, someone told me I could be here and I just sort of showed up. The professor at Michigan also didn't tell me that actually there was really no women in investment banking. But again, I just sort of plowed through. So when I went into finance, it's just a really exciting place to be. And you get to meet the most incredible CEOs and founders of businesses. And I was off to the races. I started at Smith Barney as an investment banker, worked on their largest IPO ever. Some of you might remember this. It was a toy called Teddy Ruxpin that talked and I don't know, it was cute, I guess. It was sort of like Ted, I guess the movie, it looked like that. And my job was on the roadshow was to carry the Teddy Ruxpin in my suitcase around. And I went on the roadshow and I took Teddy Ruxpin and I'd have to tell people, no, it's not a bomb. It's just a toy with a tape recorder in it. And it was a really exciting time to be in finance. So I was attracted to finance always, the numbers, the excitement, the deals. And I'm glad that Julia followed me in my footsteps.
That is wonderful. Julia, do you have any childhood memories you can share with us about the juggling that your mom did in this fast-paced career?
There was no juggling. What are you talking about?
Definitely, there were some things we maybe missed. For example, I didn't learn how to ride a bike until I was 16 years old. So post-driver's license.
Well, yeah. Well, you didn't miss it. Maybe I thought, well, we live in Connecticut, so you didn't really want, the roads were sort of windy. It wasn't important.
I feel like Connecticut is a main area to ride a bike. We're not in New York City. She took me to those special roads where they closed them down for the 5-year-olds. So we did that. I was the oldest one there.
Well, at least I got it in before you went to college.
That's true.
I may not have always done things on time, like getting to ride a bike, but at least I got it done. It may not be at the same time for everybody.
That's true. But we also never got a dog.
A dog? Do you know how hard it is to manage a dog? I mean, I couldn't possibly take the responsibility for anything else. So, there were neighbors' dogs and things like that.
That's true. At least I was the first of my friends to get a cell phone because, you're not always on time.
So there you go. So sometimes it doesn't always work in your favor. So maybe no dog, but you got the cell phone. You were probably one of the first ones.
That's true. It's my claim to fame. Well, Dad also was very much around, even though he did have a pretty demanding job. I remember him being there when you would travel and everything like that.
That's true. I would leave these long notes on how to make the lunches for my husband, who's an orthopedic surgeon, hand surgeon, microsurgery. He's amazing. And I would say it was like a full page long of how to make the lunches. Cut the corners, cut it on an angle, use this certain type of bread. Don't put the carrots in a Ziploc bag because they think they smell funny. You have to put them in a baggie instead. Make sure there are certain cookies in there. And it was a full page. I wish I could find it. I would leave this thing plastered onto the refrigerator. And then when I got home, I said, how did the lunches go? He said, you left me more directions for that lunch than it takes me to do hand microsurgery. He goes, that was insane. And I didn't follow any of it. And look, they didn't starve. So having a good partner that you can rely on, even though they don't follow the directions of cutting the sandwiches on the corner and cutting the crust off the sandwiches, is very important. And my husband was an amazing partner, is still today, obviously. And we rely on each other as a real partnership to raise both of my children together. So there you go, Julia.
Great.
There was the time, though, that I sort of screwed up when I was driving my children to school. Sometimes I didn't always know all the finer details of what was going on at the school. And again, at the time, it was all sent home on pieces of paper that my son would definitely lose and never show me. So I told my son when he entered the intermediate school, third grade, I said, I'm going to drive you to school every day. That's going to be our special time. You don't have to take the bus. He was like, yay, yippee, I'm going to be driven to school. And so we get into the car at 7:40, and I would drop him off at 7:45 and say goodbye. We'd have our little conversation. Well, then Julia entered the intermediate school 2 years later because she's 2 years younger. And I did the same thing. Yay, now I have special time before I go to work. I'm going to drop both of you off. We're going to all drive together, have these wonderful memories. And I dropped them off at 7:40. They ran into the school. And Julia comes home from school after a week of being in that new intermediate school and said, Mommy, I'm in trouble. I said, what are you in trouble for? I got called to the principal's office. What is that about? She said, I'm late for school every day. What are you talking about? I drop you off at 7:40, you run into the school. And she said, Mom, they told me school starts at 7:30. Well, my son, being a little bit more mischievous one than Julia is, never minded the extra time to watch TV or play video games. So he didn't really tell me that he was late for school every day. So sorry, Julia. But what that really made me realize, and what I did to change the situation so I knew more information, is I started a moms group. So I found a facilitator, and all the moms in town loved it. We put together, I had the head of the PTO, another woman who was class mom. I said, let me get all these really brilliant moms together and start a moms group so I never make these kind of mistakes again and I get on the inside track. And they loved it because we all had a communication together about what was going on at school. So even though I might have been late, my kids might have been late, I didn't exactly know when school started, I was able to sort of use what I learned in business of how to network, put a group together, and it all sort of in the future, I didn't make as many mistakes.
We did have some help. Shout out to Ildiko. She drove us, took us to a lot of sports. She made great snacks, dinners. She taught me how to ski. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that, Mom. But I do remember her there for a lot of my childhood. So she was definitely helpful from what I remember.
Right. I mean, Ildiko was great. She actually got her MBA at the University of Bridgeport when she was living with us. And she now lives in Alabama and has 3 children of her own. And she was really young and vibrant. And it was great to have sort of someone who really I was able to leverage, and my husband as well, to do some of the things with the kids. I really trusted her with my children. She added a lot of fun and color. I mean, some of the things that I've heard other women talk about when they're raising their children, that it's great to have a great partner. Sometimes you do have to outsource. Quality time is very important. I'm going to add in building a network of other moms around you so you know what's going on in the school. And, spending really quality time with your children and making the time quality time was something that I feel, hopefully, Julia, was helpful.
I think we also spend a lot of quality time together now too, in different ways. So
that's true.
Well, Amy, you have touched on this, but tell us what the culture was like 30 years ago for women in the industry.
Yeah, so 30 years ago seems like a long time, probably, because it is. When I started at Smith Barney as an investment banker, for those of you that are new in your career, or those of you that remember, being invited to a meeting was like really exciting, at least then when you got invited. And I got invited to lunch with one of the companies that we were working on, and I was so excited. We walked down the street, we're on 6th Avenue in the 50s, to the University Club. And this was 30 years ago. And I arrived, and everyone else with me were men. And we were going to the main dining room, and they sort of pulled them aside and said, I'm sorry, you actually can't go in the main dining room with a woman. And so we had to go through the side door and eat in a smaller conference room. And at the time, looking back on that was sort of scary and unusual. I've been back to the University Club many times since then. They let women in, they changed their ways. But also back in those days, the dress was a lot different. I wore a blue or black suit with a skirt down to my knee. I wore stockings every single day, carried around my little nail polish in case they ran, which they always did. Wore pumps, blue or black pumps, with a white shirt and a bow tie. Yes, that's what we did back then. It was a little different. I didn't get invited maybe to all the meetings, but I got myself invited. I tried to create opportunities. I did it as a woman. I learned to fit in. Today is obviously much better. We still have a long way to go in private equity to getting more women to up through the pipeline and into sort of the mid to senior rankings. Also, I want to give sort of a shout out to an organization that I've become acquainted with and a partner with on several things called IB Recruit. This is an organization that really teaches women how to get through the investment banking track and then think about private equity, because they find that the investment banks are doing a great job getting 50% of their analyst class in as women, but they don't seem to be getting into the private equity pipeline. And this organization really gives women the infrastructure and the network and the tools to get into private equity. So I think we're getting there. But 30 years ago, it was a little different.
For sure. Well, were there any specific improvements in the culture, Amy, that led you to encourage Julia to follow a career in this space? And you've mentioned a few improvements, but are there any others you would mention?
Yeah, I mean, everybody is so open now and trying to understand the dynamics of diversity and the benefit to really return on investment. In fact, 2 weeks ago, I spoke at a conference in Texas, and the moderator started with, does everybody here want to learn the secret of making 28% return on investment every year? It was a panel of all women. And we talked about to 1,000 people, what we could all do next year to sort of attract more women to private equity, and when they're there, to make them sort of rise and give their opinions, because having diversity of opinions and thoughts is proven by the Ford Foundation, that actually spent 5 years investing in diverse managed funds. And they did prove that these funds were returning on average 28%. And, I think people are really excited about this initiative and trying to figure out ways to do that. I'm glad that Julia, decided to embark on a career in financial services. And maybe, Julia, you can explain how it's been.
Yeah, definitely. So as I said before, summer of 2018, I interned at Bloomberg. So while I was there, my mom actually invited me to come volunteer to check women into an organization she works with called Exponent. So that was kind of my first experience at like a women-run event, and, seeing her in action and seeing her work the room and networking. So that was inspiring. With that, I kind of took that into my own career. So now currently at Bloomberg for the past couple of years, I've been helping to run women's groups and women's panels and roundtables where we have at least 100 women and or men as well, depending on the event. So those have been really successful thus far. My mom was featured, after she was awarded the Forbes 50 over 50, I nominated her. I did send in my recommendation letter. So you're welcome, Mom.
Thank you. It must have been impactful. What did you say in that recommendation letter?
I spoke about how I cried into my pillow when she traveled every week. But it's okay because I was proud of her. And, I know now roles reversed. She's cheering me on in my finance career. So, we're kind of similar level now.
Okay. Well, I do appreciate you nominating me for that award. And I was really excited that Forbes awarded me the 50 over 50. I've met incredible women, not only changing the face of finance, but changing really the face of the world. I feel humbled by what some of the achievements that the other women, like I met someone who helped to invent the COVID vaccine, Opal Lee, who was the leader on the Juneteenth, creating the Juneteenth as a federal holiday, and on, just really incredible people I met through Forbes. And I really think that organizations like Forbes that are highlighting people, women that are making a difference in finance. Last week, I was at CNBC has done the same thing. They had a Change Makers event where they highlighted women like the head of the WNBA, the commissioner of the Women's Soccer League, Misty Copeland. Really, I'm excited to see what women are doing now and are such leaders. But one of the things that I did that Julia alluded to was 7 years ago, a group of us, 6 women, decided that we were going to build our own network. And network is so important to business and to creating opportunities and deal making. And we founded an organization called Exponent Women. And Exponent, we're not marketing gurus, but Exponent, raising women to a higher power. That's our tagline. And our whole point is that we support women in the PE ecosystem. That's women in private equity funds, investment banks, law firms, accounting firms, insurance companies. And we really work together to find opportunities to find for each other. So if there's a deal going on, letting other people know, like maybe men do, about deals going on in the marketplace, maybe if there's an accounting firm that is being sought for a particular project, making sure that there's a women partner that could be included in the pitch or that they hear about it. And that's so important. And Exponent has been very, very successful in creating this bespoke network where people take your calls. So that's been one of the keys to the success of the organization. And I think that, building your network is something that no one can take with you. It's your asset and it's so important. And Julia, maybe you can talk a little bit about networking and how you have found it for you.
Yeah, I would say that's probably the biggest piece of advice that you've given me. Quick story. So Syracuse University brought the business school students to the city once a year. I forget what the program was called, Whitman on Wall Street, I think it was. But I was able to go to one of the networking events. And I remember it was the first time that I'd ever really been in that type of environment. I tried to talk to people, but I remember feeling a little bit uncomfortable. So I went outside and I called my mom and I said, I'm so uncomfortable. I kind of want to leave. She goes, you get back in there for at least another 30 minutes and speak to at least 5 more people. I said, okay. And I hung up the phone and I went back in there. So, networking is important. Being confident, I know, is another thing that is important too. Another kind of piece of advice or guidance that my mom has given me throughout the years are specific ways to dress for work. And I know that seems easy and not that important, but there are different caveats. Again, I know I mentioned this before, but how do women know what to wear if they don't have a mom like mine who's been in the workforce? So I'm definitely lucky.
They wear the wrong thing and then they go, oh no, right?
True. Another kind of story about how networking has led me to where I am today. So during COVID, we were all home together in Connecticut, but I ended up coming back to the city so that I was able to go into the Bloomberg office once a week. Was not mandated, but I did it on my own accord. I was trying to get into the specific group at Bloomberg in sales, which was the hedge fund region. I did notice that the manager and my potential boss were going in every Wednesday. So you best believe I was putting on those work outfits every Wednesday, going in early, going down, networking with them. I ended up being able to get into that group. I was working with hedge funds for the last 3 years, and it was a great experience. So thank you for that other piece of advice.
You're welcome. I mean, when Mike Bloomberg got on a town hall meeting, it said, "Hey, everyone, I'm in the office. We've set up the office." Bloomberg did a fantastic job, really encouraging people to get back to the office. And he said, "I'm in the office. If you see me, give me an elbow bump." I'm like, "Julia, Mike Bloomberg's in the office. Get your tail into the office." She's like, "No." I'm like, "Yes." So I'm glad I was able to be helpful to you. You even said thank you after that.
Well, you touched on a great character trait that has led to success, Amy, which is the confidence, and that's a great story. Do either of you have any other examples of that and how it's really helped benefit you in your career trajectories?
Yeah, I mean, as a young woman coming into the workforce, I definitely feel as though it could be a little bit intimidating, especially working with, I know I mentioned it before, working with clients such as hedge funds, but I do think, and investment banks, but I think that being confident in your skills is really important. Something that I had to learn was actually being confident in what you don't know, not just kind of coming up with an answer, but being able to own that you don't know something, going back, figuring it out, and then kind of just going back to your client and getting them the right answer. I think people appreciate that more. So I was lucky enough to get this elite training at Bloomberg. When you first start, you kind of spend 6 months in and out of a finance boot camp. I learned a lot. I do remember people always saying you learn more in the workforce than you do at college. So I can confidently say that I've learned more about business working at Bloomberg than I did at Syracuse.
Okay, Syracuse owes me $250,000.
I'll give them a ring. But yeah, so making all those outbound calls, and I'm actually doing at least 50 in-person meetings a month. You do need confidence, to put yourself out there and speak to C-suite executives at these investment banks and hedge funds. I work with different analyst groups and intern groups, and I run programming for them as well. So I would say that my skills have grown over the past 5 years in the workforce.
And I love that because I really do believe that a lot of the technical skills you learn early on in a lot of corporations, and Bloomberg does an amazing job at training. And I remember when you were home for COVID, I heard these conversations going on. You had mentors, they gave you feedback, you had groups, and Bloomberg did a great job training you. But getting that training early on is really critical to careers and giving you the confidence. And sometimes it can be painful, and sometimes you work until 2 a.m. and you have to get in at 7, and all these things. And not that you don't have to do that when you're late in your career too, but it really is important to get that early on training, and it makes you feel confident, which is important to take a seat at the table. And I remember it was interesting. I never thought about taking a seat at the table until I read Sheryl Sandberg's book 10 years ago, whatever it was, because honestly, I'd be like, it doesn't matter. Like, guys push themselves onto the table. And I thought, no, I should sit at the table. I should sit near the front. Why am I always saying, it's okay, I can take the side seat? So, getting that confidence and leaning in, just to use a term that, maybe gets overused, but it is really important. And I was late in my career until I realized that I was being deferential when I shouldn't. Should have been more confident. So that's very important. So I think the technical skills give you the confidence to speak up and to take a seat at the table.
And we've been talking a lot about how to be successful, but Amy, tell us, in your view, why it's important for more women to pursue careers in private equity and finance space.
I heard a statistic, and I believe that it's true, that private equity controls more companies in numbers than the New York Stock Exchange and NASDAQ combined. Being a part of the private equity community has been one of the most exciting, interesting business challenges that I've ever had. You get a front row seat to meeting with and growing companies. That's the core heart of this country, or other countries as well, but Sterling just focuses on the United States. I mean, I've met CEOs that were plumbers that started big infrastructure businesses, and men that were truckers that started extremely successful outsourcing trucking businesses. Private equity is one of the most exciting careers, and it has to do with investing real dollars, which is critical to these companies to grow the infrastructure of this country or to grow all kinds of businesses. And I feel like if more women understand the excitement and the interest and the challenge in private equity, that they might take that career path. Some brilliant young women, and my kids are in their 20s, that I know that were engineers at Ivy League schools. Some of these women, they go into consulting, and consulting is a great career. But maybe private equity should look at these women and say, pull them out of consulting and say, take a look at private equity, because it just really is an important role in this country. It's a 3 trillion asset class.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's shift gears a bit and touch upon the idea of mentors. Julia, maybe you could share some of your experiences.
Again, don't have too much experience in the workforce, but from what I have experienced, especially at Bloomberg, was the amount of mentors that they give you and help. So not only are there yearly reviews, but actually have weekly meetings with my manager just to make sure I'm on the right track and to give me feedback. Quarterly reviews, mid-year reviews. And I know my mom said she kind of heard some of that during COVID when I was home, but I can definitely vouch that that has been consistent throughout my career at Bloomberg. I think having a mentor is so important, someone who's maybe a little bit removed from your direct line. I've had a lot of mentors at Bloomberg. I also have mentors outside of Bloomberg. So I know I can always trust them to be honest with me, give me real feedback that I can trust. I also myself have been somewhat of a mentor throughout Bloomberg. They have assigned me interns. So I was able to build some programming and kind of mentor them through their internship, and some actually have joined the firm. So able to still be in connection with them as well.
I'm proud of you for that.
Thanks.
I think mentoring is really important. I didn't have one specific mentor. I have a big network of people that I can call to really think things through. Exponent, the women at Exponent, the organization that I founded for women in private equity, have been sort of colleagues and great sounding boards for me over the years to think about how to, work on certain opportunities and navigate careers. And I'm a mentor to a lot of women. In particular, I want to say that I'm on the board of advisors for an incredible organization that gives back and provides mentorship to women who are first time going to college. I have an incredible mentee. She's now working at Boeing in their finance department. And she's a first-time college in her family, first person to go to college from her family. And she's really doing great. And that organization is called Live Girl. We are always looking for ways to continue to build young women in that organization. But mentorship is really important. You don't realize what you don't know. And it's very helpful to, even at my stage, to get feedback from other people.
She's also a mentor to my friends. We forgot to mention that. I have a lot of friends who work in the finance industry, and it's funny, whenever I FaceTime her, they'll grab the phone and kind of talk to her about their careers and what they're doing.
And I'm I'm so proud of you. I've known you since you're 5 when you cut your hair off in the bathroom of my house.
It's a great memory.
My fault. I was actually home for that one.
True. It just goes to show, even if you're home, things can still happen.
Well, let's shift to talk about organizations themselves and the role that they can play in the advancement of women in these industries. So 2/3 of global deal makers surveyed said that diversity in the workplace is very important to them. And more than half surveyed said that diversity matters to their stakeholders, their managers, their executive leadership, their boards, and their clients. So to keep more women moving into more senior deal-making roles, one area of focus for organizations that employ transactional professionals might include recognition and more diversity, equity, and inclusion training. So do you have advice to organizations that are seeking to make progress to this end?
I can start, but I know Julia Bloomberg does a great job. Sterling is a fantastic firm. We're not a big organization. We have around 20 professionals at the firm. Sterling has, honestly, they were great. I started at Sterling 20 years ago. My children, or more than 20 years ago, my children were very young. They gave me flexibility. It was in Westport, Connecticut, where it's still in Westport, Connecticut, where I live. So I was able to run out and go to some of the ballet classes and things like that, and some of the sporting events, and then run back to the office. So the flexibility that Sterling was able, pre-COVID, before flexibility was really a thing, was really ahead of the time, and I really appreciated and hopefully joining noticed that I was there. So we don't have like a women's group inside our organization because we're just not that big. But I do appreciate now over the years that all these organizations have these fantastic supportive women's organizations. And one of the things because of Exponent, and that would be considered an external organization, I would say that sometimes doesn't happen, and I wish it would, is some of the junior women don't really have the flexibility to go out and network, and they're nervous to leave the office. And so I know when Exponent runs events, we don't get as many of the younger women. So there's an opportunity for some of these organizations to say, if there's an event outside of our organization that you can attend and that you get maybe a couple of these a year or however they want to say it, because meeting women outside of your company is also really important, or meeting anybody, men and women, is important for your professional career. Julia, what do you think about what's going on at Bloomberg for you?
Yeah. So I know I touched upon this earlier, but I do work with a team at Bloomberg to put on events. Right now it's quarterly. But yeah, so they've been roundtables, panels. We actually have one next week where we are bringing in some external women who have started their own businesses, one of which actually used to work at Bloomberg. But some of the topics that we've spoken about at these women's events are, communicating with management. So kind of advocating for yourself in your mid-year conversations and your end-of-year conversations. There are a lot of working moms at Bloomberg. And I think that since COVID, I don't really know what it was like before, but since COVID, they've provided a lot of flexibility to those with families and those who live outside of the city as well. So we speak about work-life balance and kind of navigating having a family. And Bloomberg does have great health benefits and maternity leave, and I've seen that firsthand from my colleagues. So definitely happy to work at a company that cares about their employees, and I think that that's really important.
Just a few more questions. Can you talk a little bit about how you believe women of each of your generations will be able to influence the industry, particularly as the career path just continues to evolve?
Yeah. So a lot of women, especially my age, in their 20s and 30s, I have seen a lot of women starting their own entrepreneurial businesses. So I don't know if you've heard of like a Mrs. Dow Jones, right? She's kind of like an influencer, but she teaches women how to manage their own money. There's also fashion influencers, right, on Instagram and TikTok. And these women are actually making a really great living for themselves. And I don't know overall how everyone feels, but most of my friends, I would say, are excited to work and, make their own money throughout the rest of their lives and have that for themselves.
I think that's so exciting because in my generation, we didn't really have as much opportunity to have these choices. Technology wasn't where it is today. Job transparency, looking for jobs, it was just more challenging. So to hear from Julia how, a lot of women are starting companies, and we all know the statistic that a lot of the venture capital dollars, only 2% are going to women that are founding companies. And so us on the private equity venture capital side, are trying to change that. There's a lot of women starting funds, a lot of LPs that are looking to fund women's funds and diverse funds. So that's exciting to see maybe my generation helping Julia's generation, who are the entrepreneurs and taking advantage of the technology and starting companies, very quickly. And hopefully, Julia, some of us women that are making more of the decisions can be, sending investment dollars in your direction.
Thank you for that. Please send me more dollars.
You're welcome. That's over. Sorry.
So can you all give me an example of somebody who has inspired you?
I would have to say, okay, I feel like an athlete getting like the Heisman Trophy. I'd have to say my mother. Thanks, Mom, for inspiring me. But my mother in our family, so if we wanted all the special things and perks in life, my mother needed to work. And she did. And she was an entrepreneur in the 70s when entrepreneur, I didn't think was a fashionable word to say. And it was certainly not fashionable for women to be working in the 70s. And she started a company and traveled. And, when I was a little girl, I would travel with her or go to trade shows with her and offer cookies to the customers. And she always said to me, as a woman, you always need to know that if you need for your family or for any situation, that you should always have the ability to work and make money, because you just never know in life what could happen. And she might have said that a little too often, but to scare me like crazy.
You say to me too.
I'm sorry, I passed that on, but it is important. And so I think that my mom was an inspiration to me in many ways, and showed me that you could really do things that, and as a woman, and have a business. And that was in a very difficult, environment where there really were no women working. And so she's been my inspiration.
Well,
Julia, who's yours?
Nana. No, I'm kidding. It's you. You set me up for that one. Again, not many of women in your generation have made it to where you are. You're all over LinkedIn. Everyone I work with and who I'm friendly with knows who you are. I brag about you. It's so cool that you work, you make your own money. You do all these really great things with women, even though, sometimes you do show some tough love. I'm very proud to have a mom who works as hard as you do and makes such a difference.
Well, so to wrap things up, could you each tell us advice that you would give to your younger self? Maybe think early 20s.
What I would say I've learned throughout my very long career is, raise your hand for everything. Take every opportunity that is presented to you, if it fits what you think is right. I think a lot of women have what's called imposter syndrome. You're never really ready for the next step in your career unless you kind of jump in and try it, right? You would already be in that role if you're ready for it. So raising your hand and taking a step and making sure you're challenging yourself.
I love that. That was very sage advice for someone who's been working for 4 years.
Thank you.
Excellent. It is actually excellent advice. I like that. You've learned that so far, and it's really important throughout your career. As I said before, I think never stop working completely. If you can keep your toe in the water and do something that could be related to something in the future, I think that's really important. Really learn those basic skills. They're going to be critical, early on. Put the hours in. Take advantage of larger firms' training programs if you can get into some of those larger firms. Build a great foundation, because that foundation is going to be the leverage you have to get flexibility if you should need it for the future in your career. Enjoy the ride. A career is, as you can tell from me, decades. Sometimes you'll take a step back. Sometimes the company will lay you off, and you get back on and be yourself. Try to be yourself, but also fit in. There's a fine line between being yourself and fitting in. And sometimes when there's less women and more men, it's harder to fit in. But I'm a big believer in knowing what's going on your local sports team. And maybe, that's just the current events. Just know it. I don't believe we don't have to know about sports and what other people, if you want to fit in, fit in. Don't be afraid to ask older people like me for advice. I'm always amazed how, and maybe I'll regret saying this in public forum, but I really welcome people to call me, young people who graduate my alma mater, University of Michigan, people I know, give advice. I was at last night at a networking event, and people were saying that they take calls from young people all the time, and network. That would be my advice.
Well, Amy and Julia, thank you so very much for sharing your insights. You're both very accomplished and made so many contributions and are an inspiration to all of us in the space.
Well, Julia, I'm really proud of you, and I love you.
Love you too.
And I'm sorry I won't be able to make Mother's Day this year, but I'll be out of town.
We'll celebrate a weekend before, no worries.
See, flexibility still is important.
Well, thank you for having us.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Our pleasure.
Thank you for joining us at the table for this episode of Deal Us In. If you have a recommendation for an inspiring interviewee, a question you'd like us to ask, or topic you would like to hear covered, or if you'd like to tell us about women-focused initiatives in the field, please email us at wpef@McGuireWoods.com. We look forward to hearing from you. This podcast was recorded and is being made available by McGuireWoods for informational purposes only. By accessing this podcast, you acknowledge that McGuireWoods makes no warranty, guarantee, or representation as to the accuracy or sufficiency of the information featured in the podcast. The views, information, or opinions expressed during this podcast series are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily reflect those of McGuireWoods. This podcast should not be used as a substitute for competent legal advice from a licensed professional attorney in your state and should not be construed as an offer to make or consider any investment or course of action.